Okay, so hello everybody, and welcome to what I think is the 8th week of the 2021-22 CHIWORK symposium. We've got Andrew Kuhn here from the University of Hampshire as a guest, and before I tell you a little bit more about him, let me tell you about CHIWORK. So in this series, we have weekly conversations with experts on various aspects of the future of work. Andrew and Orit Shear are the general chairs, and the technical program chairs are Chris Janssen, Neha Kumar, Helena Mentis, and myself. We also have a fantastic team of volunteers that help us to create these series, and you can find out more about them and the future of work sessions themselves on our website, which is chiwork.org, and the link is in the chat. On that website, you can also find a link to register. And if you do that, we'll send you information about talks and calendar invitations with links to the Zoom call. The series is partially supported by the National Science Foundation. And in today's format, we'll have a 30-minute conversation with Andrew, which will include questions from you, the audience, which hopefully will be handled by Chris today, although I know that he might be a little late joining us. After that conversation, so after about the first 30 minutes, we will stop the recording and then have some time for a more informal conversation. So let me introduce you to Andrew, if you've not met him before. So his research focuses on speech interfaces and augmented reality interfaces in vehicles, and emerging trends in HCI for automated vehicles and working from home, and also on the use of visual behavior to model relationships between user interface characteristics and user performance and satisfaction. So Andrew, emerging trends in HCI for working from home sounds right up my street, because I geek out over this kind of topic all the time. And one of the things that I think's kind of interesting thinking about this as a topic is that we're now in mid-November 2021, and I still haven't really gone back to working in the office the way that I used to do. And I know that you recently published a paper that was looking at how people changed their working patterns when shifting to working from home last year as a result of the pandemic. So I thought we might start there with you telling us a bit about what you found.
Sure, yeah, this, same here as far as going to, or not really going to the office and working from home. So this was a really wonderful collaboration with a couple of colleagues from Harvard Business School, Tomas Teodorovitz and Rafaela Sadun, and then Orit Shear and myself. And so we actually started out looking at how people work or might wish to work in future automated vehicles. And that was before the pandemic. And then the pandemic struck and we realized that we have an opportunity to look at, how people work before and after, or before and really during the pandemic. So in essence, we have data in 2 waves from about 1,200 participants who completed these time use studies. Basically, you ask people, remember a recent day and tell me in some time increments what happened during that day as far as work tasks and other tasks and how the day went. So it's really a rich and exciting set of data that gives us insight into how exactly the work patterns changed. And so here's what we found. First of all, we looked at commuting, and we found that we focused, by the way, on managers in this particular case, managers of companies. And managers did reallocate their commuting time. So obviously during the pandemic, they didn't commute a whole lot to work, they stayed at home. But they mostly put that time into work and not into personal time. So if you didn't commute to work, it doesn't mean that you were on the couch, you mostly spent additional time working. One additional thing that I thought was really interesting is that their days got more fragmented, which means that they had a larger number of shorter task engagements, and their work spread out more over the course of the day. So maybe you started work at 8 o'clock in the past and ended at 5. well, now you might be starting at 8, but the last piece of work that you do might be at 10 or 11. And partially because you have these short tasks that get interrupted and interleaved and whatnot, and they spread out over the entire day. So I thought that was very interesting. The types of tasks were interesting too. There was a lot of interactive tasks, meaning email or social media interaction with people. And presumably this is to replace those interactions that used to happen in the office, just walking by someone's desk. And then finally, we also found that our results are mostly driven by managers at large firms in contrast to smaller firms. So it looks like really the difference, the change happens, at least in our data set, in large firms. So that's where these effects are truly visible. So if you're working at a large firm, that is probably what's going on. You end up commuting less, and then you work more, and then you do a lot of interactive activities to perhaps make up for that time that you used to have in the office, and you don't have it anymore to interact with people directly, and you have a very much fragmented day.
So did you in your data set get any idea about what it was that was causing the fragmentation?
So that's, the truth is that we ask people what you do and not necessarily why that happened.
Yeah.
So we can only make, educated guesses, if you will, right? So for example, we know what happens at firms, right? They do engage in various activities that are attempting to bring people together, maybe like CHIWORK, right? Which,
yeah.
So we have at least evidence that supports the expectation, the hypothesis, if you will, of why exactly this happened, or how, why is it that they might be sending more email out, or why is it that they have these interactive activities? But you're right, this is definitely a limitation of the method itself, right? So we would need to tackle this in a different way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm wondering whether some of it was by choice, right? That given that the fact that people were working at home, maybe they were really choosing to fragment their days because it provided opportunities for them to interleave with other things that they couldn't do when they were based in an office before.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's a very good point. So, maybe you want to spend that lunch hour with someone and not working, and now you're going to, or maybe you want to walk your kids into school.
Yeah.
You didn't have time to do that before, and your choice is now to do some work at 9 p.m. when they're in bed. So I fully agree. There's this interesting work about shaping those boundaries between, you're very familiar with this, obviously. And I think that might be exactly what's going on in at least some of the cases.
Yeah. So I guess as we're kind of, but supposedly moving forward, but maybe like you and I don't seem to be moving forward yet, but everyone's talking about moving forward to a new way of working, and maybe we'll return to the office or maybe we'll have some kind of more hybrid setup. I'm wondering whether these sorts of patterns that you found will be permanent changes, or whether people will kind of return back to the way that they used to do things. So I was wondering whether you're planning on doing some kind of follow-up study to then see, like 1 year on or 2 years on, how things have turned out, and what do you think that would show if you did do that?
So yes, we're actually wrapping up a third wave. So that's very exciting. I'm very happy with that. So we'll find, we'll be able to report, we'll have the same type of data. So we'll see, for example, if this fragmentation remained, if how many more people are now driving back to work and so forth. So we'll have some of that. And I'm really hopeful that we're going to continue doing this for a few years. I'm not sure what that means. And I'm also hopeful that we can expand this to other countries, right? So this is US-based data. And so I don't know that it's all necessarily all that different in other countries, but some things will be different. I mean, the way people commute to work obviously is very much different than depending on the location. So I suspect that some of these changes will be persistent. A lot of companies are lining up to not return to work in the office, right? Or some sort of a hybrid arrangement. And so even if you work at a firm that is returning to the office full time, you will be affected by interacting with people who are not. So some sort of hybridity, I expect, will continue to be there. And for some people, it's going to be fully staying at home. And for some people, it's interacting with colleagues at the firm or interacting with people at other institutions. So I think this hybrid version of some people are at home, some people are not. I think that's going to remain for the foreseeable future and perhaps forever, right? This might be one of those places where times really have changed. Like World War II, you end up with the introduction of large corporations that wasn't really there before. And now we think large corporations are the way to go. But it wasn't before, like 100 years ago, it wasn't the case. So there might be just another shift that's coming up.
Yeah. So like I know you've also been looking at this whole idea about people working in their car and when they're driving. And so if we all do return to the office, even if it's just for part of the week, and we might be getting back into our cars a bit more, and like I wondered what you think that will, in this kind of future scenario where perhaps we have self-driving cars and so we have more choice about what our activities are, what kinds of activities do you think we'll choose to use our commuting time for? Like, because I think the fact that you noticed this switch where the commuting time kind of got given over to the company, for then we get our commuting time back, if you've got thoughts about how that might show up.
Yeah, so I do think that hopefully in the near future, we will end up with vehicles that are automated for some part of the time, right? So I don't think that it's going to be fully automated, as in I get in at home and then an hour later I'm at work and I didn't ever touch the steering wheel, but some sort of automation where perhaps good portions of that trip are not going to require my input. So I think that's an opportunity to do something. Now, what exactly it is that people will do. So, we did this 2-wave study, right, that I mentioned. And the first wave was, people were commuting. And so it's clear that commuting time mainly crowds out personal time. So if you commute so we found, every 1% increase in daily commute time, you lose about 1/3% of personal time, but only 1/10% of work time. So as you increase commuting, you lose personal time at 3 times the rate that you lose work time. So it's personal time that you're giving up with commuting. So most likely, one aspect that if you're going to keep commuting, you probably would like some of that personal time back. And so I think that's one place where it's probably worth really focusing. And then, practically speaking, this is work with Chris and also with Alberta and Nabil, who are here in the audience. One interesting aspect of it, where we should perhaps focus on as HCA researchers is this switching between these tasks. So again, the reality is that you're going to switch between driving and not, in my opinion, for the foreseeable future if you're driving in your own vehicle, because it will be automated, but at a relatively low level where it can handle some scenarios, but many it cannot handle. So it'll call you back. So the shifting between tasks turns out to be not a one-shot deal. It's not like now you will stop driving and then you will go to something else, or now you stop this non-driving task and you go to driving, but it's more of an interleaving between these tasks. So it's going to be interesting to see how you support that. And I'm very interested also in one aspect of this, which is returning to the non-driving task. So the car says, okay, come to drive. You need to stop your task, which is probably going to be difficult in some cases because you're really immersed in it. But I think knowing that when you come back to it, there will be support for you to resume effectively will be an encouragement to be able to stop. And then, of course, that resumption being supported will make it more pleasant if it's a personal task, or more efficient, right, as well. So I think those are interesting questions for us to look at.
So like people have obviously looked at interruptions in work tasks for quite a long time and in lots of different scenarios. And I guess it's interesting to think about, well, if we're using the car for personal time, we might be using it for things that look like work. So, you know, calling a friend or ordering a birthday card or those sorts of things, which I can imagine look very much like many of the tasks that have already been studied. But you might, if you're using it for leisure tasks, you might be thinking about watching a movie or playing a game. Do you think those are in some way importantly different, those sorts of activities that are leisure activities in some way, so that the work that has already been done looking at interruptions in work tasks won't translate to? Or do you think we can generalize across these different scenarios?
That's a good question. I think, at least intuitively, it seems like some of them might be easier, right? So playing some games might be less, scrolling through Facebook is probably something that you can stop relatively easily without a big worry, right? So I think that giving up, stopping Facebook, stopping Twitter might not be all that hard. So at least some
and it
of
might
these,
not matter where you pick up either,
exactly,
right? Yeah.
I mean, it jumps around on you anyway, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It sort of has these weird, like, oh, now it's a different page. So I think you're right that at least in some cases, a lot of these things are sort of relaxations and not that difficult to stop. So I have hoped at least that even watching a movie might not be all that hard to stop. In contrast to maybe some other tasks where you're deeply engaged and having to use your memory, right? Your working memory or something like that, right? To then really know what you're up to. And that's sort of a problem for returning to it easily.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's some research looking at which tasks are really good to help you to recover from work-related stress, that suggests that the things that are important for you to engage with are not things that look like other work. So it shouldn't be housework, right? So maybe
Right.
It also shouldn't be doing your supermarket shopping.
Right.
But
first-person shooter games might be. I'm kind of curious how you stop that, right? Because it's not easy to resume, is it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I do wonder whether those sorts of things might be quite different, and when we need to start thinking about those sorts of activities.
So my son plays a driving game, and there is a rewind feature. So I'm curious if having a rewind in your first-person shooter game might be actually kind of nice to get you back into the flow.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so I think there are a couple of questions in the chat, so I'm going to hand over to Chris to curate those for us.
Great. Thanks, Anna and Andrew. I see 2 questions in the chat. If there's more, then maybe those came in before I opened it. So make sure I see it. I'm going to tackle them in inverse order because Navina's question that came in later is related to the driving scenario. Navina, are you in a position to ask the question yourself? If so, please ask it. Otherwise, I will phrase it.
Sure, yeah. The first question, pretty broad. I didn't actually have anything in mind when I typed it out, but do you foresee policies around climate change affecting the research space of working in vehicles? And I guess underlying that is, do you foresee related or relevant policies around climate change in the first place?
Sure, I think that's a really good question in the sense of, if you have these automated vehicles that are super convenient, then you might be willing to live further away from your destination, from work, right? And spend more time in your car, which might result in higher fuel consumption and negative effects on the environment. So that's clearly a potential problem. And an optimist on this one, in that we do seem to be developing decent technology that hopefully will reduce the impact of individual vehicles. And at the same time, I think they also bring advantages that that you cannot always have with all versions of public transportation. For example, if I can, it's wonderful to be in a place, unlike where I live right now, where public transportation is plentiful, accessible, easy to use, convenient. And I think a lot of the time that's the right answer, right? But it's not always the case, right? There are definitely situations where people, whether where they live or who they are and how they can move, a vehicle that comes close, right, basically to their door is a big difference maker. So hopefully that makes sense.
And Andrew, I'm quite interested in a sort of a follow-up, because what I'm noticing is that there's a tension between a couple of aspects at the moment. So there's lots of factors influencing why people are thinking, oh, we won't be driving that much anymore, right? So there's on the one side the climate change and sustainability. That might be a reason to drive less or to commute less if we're thinking about going to a conference maybe. But also these discussions about, oh, due to the work being forced to work from home, people have seen that some work we can actually do from home. So where in the past we might commute somewhere to do the work, we now realize, hey, I could just have a Zoom call with Andrew to discuss instead of flying over. So how do you see that tension between all these multiple perspectives of we might work remotely, or we might travel or not travel, right? Because they are at odds. Sometimes they align really well and they're good motivations for driving or for not driving, but sometimes they're also a bit at odds.
Yeah, I think it's a good, it seems to me that it's a good idea to separate the problems that we have, right? So a huge problem is climate change. And so a big contributing factor is transportation. But it's not transportation in the sense of you're traveling, it's how you're traveling, what exactly the mode of transportation is that you're using, right? So it's not clear, it's not it isn't the only way, right, to solve this problem, to not travel. You could also think about better ways of traveling. Or additionally, there are many different possible solutions. It's not the case that the only solution is not to travel, right? So I think that's one thing that's important. And then you're right in terms of, here we are. I think I personally very much enjoy, obviously, these conversations. So I find them to be quite productive. And it's not clear to me that they would be that much better if we were all in person, especially not if we have to do this every week, right? It's not reasonable. But at the same time, in some cases, travel is essential. I mean, one argument that I was recently reading a book by Karl Popper, and his argument is that democracy itself started by Athens traveling, right? Athens having ships that travel from Athens to other cities and cultural clashes, right? And this is what brings about conversations that bring about, an expansion of your views that ultimately end up in democracy, in contrast to being a closed society and living under certain rules that never change because that's how things are. So, there are very good reasons from these very basic, making sure that people have a broad view of the world to actually travel. So yes, there is this clash, but I think it's really one thing that I think is really important to think about is what is it about driving in particular that we are worried about, and I think it has to do with the mode of transportation in contrast to transportation itself. It's not necessarily the travel itself, it's how you're doing it right now. So if we can improve that, then it's not clear that we just don't travel. It's just, travel with something that pollutes less.
Yep. I want to shift gears a little bit. There's a question from Himanshu more about how remote working really changes the interaction we have. You have a very nice example there. Maybe you can elaborate a bit on it, Himanshu.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Andrew and Anna, for this discussion. And at the very beginning, you were saying, when you were sharing insights from your study, Andrew, you said that there was a significant increase in interactive or communicative tasks. People are spending more time over emails, and some of them, like us, we had Slack channel dedicated to the lab. And one of the things we tried to do was, because we are not having these water cooler chats anymore or around the coffee, these informal discussions, which kind of are very important in research, we gave it a fixed time every Tuesday afternoon, and we had it on Zoom. And soon people started complaining that it also has an agenda. It's a meeting. It's not a kind of this improvised act of serendipitous discussion. Did you also notice this kind of an observation in your, I mean, I'm wondering if there is not just our group or we did it the wrong way, but there's also others who felt the same way, that also kind of the informal discussions became more formalized.
So, you know, unfortunately, the data set that we have isn't of the type that would allow us to discern changes like that. So I cannot make claims about it. And so I don't know. I mean, I know you're interested in these blended spaces, so I'm sure that it'll be interesting to talk about how you blend these virtual experiences with in-person experiences. I'm also, I guess I understand the idea of chance encounters and how they support work. And I'm also deeply disturbed by the idea that somehow chance encounters are the reason I'm successful or not. And so that worries me. And I hope that it's not completely true. So I guess there's this tension that I feel, which is, you know, do we really all rely on chance encounters at conferences, or you know, or is it really much more structured than that, and we can take advantage of some of those structures? So I don't know, perhaps you have some thoughts on this, but I guess that's what I think is that's what it does worry me, the whole chance encounter idea. It leaves me uneasy.
Yeah, it's a good point, but I think what I was also alluding to was the fact that giving, or maybe what we did in our group as an experience was that we gave too much of a structure to something that was an improvised act. And I think that's why it somehow kind of had a very unfavorable view.
Yeah.
And this is something that we realized much recently now, and then we are examining how to go on and doing it better.
Looking forward to hearing what you find.
Thanks.
Really, really hard to do something unstructured when you don't know when someone's online, right? Unless you have a really big lab with multiple time zones, and there's always at least a chance that someone's online. So it's a devil's dilemma. Speaking of dilemmas, we have one more question from Anna Rudnicka about, I guess, some ethical concerns about working in the car. Anna, are you in a position to ask a question yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. So yeah, I was wondering if you foresee potential policy implications to do with privacy and autonomy. So there's the issue of time, of what happens when, you know, employers start expecting that extra hour, or extra 2 hours, but also of the car as a space traditionally associated with privacy. And I think, so we've recently done some work on privacy in connected cars, and something interesting that we found is one of our participants was using a Tesla provided by an employer. So, and they kept wondering, is the employer tracking me? Are they tracking my, you know, the way I brake, how fast I drive? And that's something that was very unrelated to their work as, you know, a person commuting to work or to a place of business. And I'm just wondering, you know, as cars become these powerful sort of, maybe like big computers that enclose us. Is it even safe for employees to work in cars without having every little bit of their lives, including the lives of their potentially minor children, being surveilled by employers?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So first, as far as the extra time is concerned, so the ideal scenario is that, in fact, you gain time, right? Because some of that time that you used to have to spend driving, in principle, becomes available to do things that are not driving. So if you don't enjoy driving, then you can substitute some of that time. The 5 minutes here and the 10 minutes there can become maybe an additional work task that you can do. And presumably that cuts down on the amount of work that you have to do in your office. And then maybe you can come home a little sooner, right? Some of us actually might even enjoy some of the work, right? So it's not always the same. It's not true that all work is just drudgery. And so some of us might choose to do the work because it's exciting. It's rewarding in various ways. And then right now, of course, employees have the upper hand, right? So right now, I think the chances of you being forced into additional work are low because you can quit and you can say, forget it, I'm not doing this. And that's what people, at least in the United States, are doing in droves, right? Lots of people are simply quitting and saying, this is just not working for me, I'm done. And I'm going to find myself a better employer. But that might change. And of course, it will change eventually, right? These things go through cycles. And sometimes employers have the upper hand and sometimes employees. And right now, employees do. But I think your question becomes even more important when employers are the ones who have the upper hand and jobs are more scarce. And now you have much less choice. And I think at that point, your question will become very important again, or even more important, I should say, because then that extra hour will be the difference between you keeping your job or not. So it would be very important for us to have structures in place that prevent that sort of, coercion, if you will, of extracting additional time just because they can, right, do so. And then privacy is just tricky. It's so tricky, and because you're right, that unfortunately, things are connected. And I'm not even sure how, your Roomba takes video of your, basically creates maps of your house and sends it off to Roomba World for stuff that gets sold. So unfortunately, everything that we use right now is highly connected, and data is being extracted all the time. And so this, I fully agree with you. This is a large issue that needs, regulation.
I'm sure there's more to say about this topic and also about other questions that might come from the audience, but I want to make sure to hand over to Anna so we can close off on time and then move on to the informal parts. Anna, over to you.
Thanks. So we're already running late, but I have two things I want to ask you. So I'm going to squeeze one in before we finish. So we were talking earlier about this idea of using time in the car for like leisure activities and the fact that that's really good for us, right? And I know that one thing that we know is really good for us as a leisure activity is spending time in nature and getting outside. And you've been looking at VR nature experiences and their impact on us. So just before we finish, I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about what you found on that.
Yes, so multiple people around the room participated in this work, but the short of it is that, yes, it's good to be in nature. And one question is, if during a pandemic, you're stuck at home and there is no nature to be seen, can you use virtual reality to get at least some of the benefits? And so we had this nice 9-week study where people took VR headsets and used them for 6 out of those 9 weeks. And what we found was the following, that it reduced their stress, or at least the interventions that we had. So it was VR for 6 weeks, and also mindfulness practices for the last 3 weeks. So all of this reduced their level of stress and increased their self-assessed level of focus. So these were self-assessment questions, are you stressed, are you focused? And those got better over time. And then we also looked at a couple of measures of creativity. And this is convergent and divergent thinking. There are commonly used tests, right? Can you find a common word for these 3 words? That would be convergent, and divergent is, here's a paperclip. Tell me all the uses you can think of. And this wasn't as clear, and some of them got better, sometimes they got worse, but clearly what we can say is that these nature experiences can potentially have a positive effect even on creativity. So I think this is a little trickier question, partly because one exciting aspect of this study, by the way, is that it was 9 weeks, right? So how do you look at creativity over 9 weeks in contrast to creativity over a one-shot deal in the lab? And what sort of creativity matters over long periods of time, and how do you actually assess that? So I think that is one of those questions that would be really good to keep exploring.
Cool. Okay, thank you very much. It's been really good to talk to you. It's good to have you in the hot seat for a change.
I know.
Thank you to everybody for joining us. I think I'll just say a few words before we finish up. So you can join us on Twitter at CHIWORK Simp, and we'll be able to put the link for that in the chat. Next week, we're going to be taking a break for those who are celebrating Thanksgiving. But please join us again on the 2nd of December when Helena Mentis will be talking to Stina Matheson about implicit bias and stereotyping in globally distributed work. So we can stop the recording now.